Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Ink the Reader. Today I am wrapping up the books I've read in the month of July. So you've seen the stats. I have to come clean and say that July was a disappointing month in terms of reads because I had a massive TBR. I was so eager to read, but then life happened and I had family coming over to visit. I prioritized spending a lot of time with my friends, and ultimately when I looked at my TBR there were so many exciting books that I was looking forward to read and I couldn't get around to. So I'm just gonna tell you those the ones I didn't get around to, and I am sorry. For now they will have to go back on the shelf, okay? That is how it is. Also, I was a bit over enthusiastic with leg day, lifting weights and stuff like that, so this could be a plus for the viewers because I can't really move much. Like the bottom half of my body is not functioning as usually as it should be. So hopefully I can stay still more than usual, and that will help my camera to focus better. But yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna show you the books I couldn't get around to, and then we're gonna go into the wrap-up. This is from the least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable read. Enjoyment doesn't always reflect quality, just so you know, but this is what the books I was more invested in, or I enjoyed the process of reading overall more. So yeah, let's start with the ones where I couldn't though get around to. So I couldn't read The Outsiders, didn't read Heart of Darkness, and unfortunately didn't read Roadside Picnic. I didn't read this massive boy, Lion Cub. This is the third book in a series that was very kindly sent to me by the author, and I am up to like book 3, but I couldn't just even start this month. Didn't get around to the Bedlam Stacks, and very unfortunately couldn't get around to Carry On. I know this is disappointing. I was gonna read these if I had time at the end of the month and then didn't. The Fairy Loot book box for June, I believe I couldn't read. Sing Me to Sleep, and yeah, it's still on my TBR. In general, like, I love the aesthetic of this book and I really like the premise, but didn't have time. Couldn't get around to this one, The Thousandth Floor, but honestly I think I'm gonna get rid of it because it's a YA and I'm not very interested in YA anymore. So when I was looking at the next book to read, this was always my last choice. So I don't think I'm gonna keep it unless some of you have read it and it was the best thing ever. And finally, I couldn't read Heart of a Sun Warrior either, another stunning Fairy Loot sequel that I bought. So yeah, none of these happened this month, okay? I'm sorry. Okay, let's go into the books that I did get around to read, shall we? So at number 12 I put We Spread. This is a short audiobook I found on Scribd, and I decided to listen to it while doing other stuff. It's a literature fiction, and it's the story of this woman who has lost her husband and now moves to a retirement home to spend the last years of her life. Honestly, there is not much more to this book than that. And that was also why I kind of didn't enjoy my experience that much. I was expecting somehow from some of the review I heard that this was more like speculative fiction or more like thriller, and I was expecting a plot twist that never comes. Without trying to spoil anything, but there is not much to spoil, to be fair. You just live like a slice of life of someone who is losing consciousness, in a sense, or losing the sense of time, and you're just following her over the last months of her life. Perhaps for the right audience this can be like a very solid read. For me, overall, it wasn't. It's not a kind of literature fiction slice of life that I'm particularly interested in. I enjoy maybe this kind of format or this kind of stories more in a movie format rather than a book. I just found quite dull. I didn't have anything against the protagonists or the writing or anything of the sort, or even the narrator. It was just okay. It's definitely one that if I knew the premise I would have never reached out for. So I went into this with different expectations that unfortunately didn't turn out to be right. And that it's on me as well, to be fair. At number 11, we have The Mask of Sanity. Now, this was actually a mistake. I initially was looking for a book that had a similar title that was a non-fiction, and I believe it was around like a study around psychopathy. And I was on Script and typed in the title, and this came out, and I started to listen to this before realizing that I was completely wrong. This was a fictional book, a thriller fiction book, and definitely not what I was looking for when I went in and typed in the title. However, at that point I had listened to half an hour of it, and I decided I was gonna stick to it and complete my listening, and it wasn't too long at all. And this is the story of this man. He is an esteemed doctor, I think a cardiologist if I remember correctly, and one day he finds out that his wife is having an affair with a colleague of his, and so he decides to get rid of his colleague, and in order to do so and get away with murder, he needs to pretend that a serial killer has been plaguing the area. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. This is all you need to know in going into this. Overall, I wasn't mad that I by mistake got around to listen to these. Overall, this was a very different kind of thriller. It's one where you don't go in to find out who the bad guy is, you know, from the start, and you don't get in because you like any of the characters, because truly they are quite unlikable, apart from actually the guy that is, you know, the lover of a wife is the only one that I actually found quite sweet. And you go in to find out if the bad guy you've been following from page 1, and you know this from the synopsis, is he gonna get caught? Is he gonna get away with it? And this is a big question of this book. And I like the end because it wasn't expected. I was surprised because despite the fact that, of course, like, this book was overall very far-fetched, and I by no means am an expert when it comes down to psychopathy and the dark triad and stuff like that, so I can't say that this guy was a perfect evil guy. Like, I didn't find him remarkably noticeable as like a bad guy, or like, you know, when you follow like a bad guy in the story. So it didn't stood out to me like it was a bit far-fetched how his life was, and the crimes he committed, and the crimes how they were made. They were kind of a bit like rushed, like very quickly description. So this is why this is 11th place, because if I do analyze this novel objectively, it's not that great. The content is not that great, but I enjoy the premise and I found the ending quite surprising. So this is why overall I wouldn't probably suggest this unless you're a very big fan of thrillers and you're intrigued by the premise. But overall, I can't even say, you know, it's a horrible book. It was okay, actually. It's something that overall in the month, if I think back at it, I was just like, oh, okay, that was like a weird read that made me think at the end, but it wasn't that deep at the same time. Initially, when I first sat down, I put these higher up, like number 9 or something like the sort, not number 11. But then, just thinking about the enjoyment of it, to be fair, I enjoyed stuff that ultimately I liked more, were more pleasant, despite me then liking the plot of these probably better than the plot of the next couple of novels. I don't know, it makes sense in my head, let's go with this. At number 10, I've got a book that initially I'd put at number 11. Like, I really disliked this book. And this is unfortunate because when I did the unboxing for Fairyloot and saw that this was inside, I was so excited about these. And this is Shanghai Immortal. And this is a Fairyloot book for the month of June, I believe, the adult book. And I'll link down below the unboxing if you wanna have a look at how stunning and beautiful this book is. So, it's a bit difficult for me to describe this book because I think when I read the synopsis and, you know, read that this is about this girl, half vampire, half creature / demon, raised in hell, and now finding out that potentially someone is plotting against the devil, or like the devil has been raising her, and so her trying to find clues and being helped by this human that is sent to hell because he's a lawyer and he needs to set up the bank of hell. When initially I read all of these, I was expecting, dumbly, because I was dumb in expecting that this was very similar to the Christian hell, so full of demon and bad people and so on. And instead this is based on hell from Oriental mythology, Oriental culture, and it was very different from what I was expecting. So yes, they are in hell, but they're not the bad guys at all. Like, they're not tormented, people are not tortured. It's not like the punishment kind of hell that I'm used to. And again, take this with a pinch of salt because I'm very unfamiliar with the lore, all the culture behind this book. And this is also my critique because I was fascinated by this culture when I found that the hell is different here. It's not the hell I'm used to. Then I became kind of like, oh cool, let's learn about these. But I do not think that the author takes enough time to explain anything about the setting. She doesn't word build these hell and these kind of other kingdoms well enough for me to appreciate them. And what happened is that eventually I get bored, because also must be said, because there is like nothing else happening in this book. There are like 30 pages of action toward the end. All the rest is just them navigating this world and just mentioning stuff and things that, because they're not explained well, after a while I just lost interest. And so if you want to have a very quiet plot, you should do the world building in that quiet moment. You got 300 pages of quiet, build something with it. And I don't know, I didn't love this at all. Unfortunately, I found it quite boring and I wanted to put it down a couple of times. I didn't mind our main protagonist, but Mr. Lee, like the guy, the lawyer that's sent to set up the Bank of Hell, dull. It must be one of the more boring love interests I've read in a while. For the first 100 pages it doesn't say anything, and then it just says very little, and none of the things he says are interesting. So I didn't buy the couple in this, like, at all. Not the biggest fan of the writing as well. Like, she uses some words from their native language, I guess, but the way they're done it, like, she calls like boob status, and like they are like mentioned sometimes in ways that I found quite cringy. Didn't really work for me, because you're expecting vampire, hell, demons, like very gritty, grim, dark fantasy, and this is none of that. It's very superficial, fluffy, like silly at times, with not very good world building. So yeah, I gave it 2 stars, 2.5. Definitely not gonna continue on with the series at all, and I don't know, I might keep it because it's just so stunning to look at. I might eventually sell my copy from Fairyloot, we will see, but disappointment. Another disappointing read follows Shanghai Immortal, and this is not disappointing necessarily because I hated it, but because I found it quite meh. And I know that people are very divisive around this book, either they love it or they hate it, and I'm just like unremarkable, what's next? And this is unfortunately the Midnight Library. I categorize this as magic realism, but I could be completely wrong. I've read some people calling it sci-fi. Whatever is the case, you follow this girl. She's very down her luck and she overdoses. She wants to kill herself, and she finds herself, rather than dead, she finds herself in this library where she's able to access books and accessing different lives she could have had if she had made tiny different choices throughout her life thus far. And so you just follow her, following some of these lives around. And what didn't work well for me, it was dull. Like, the main protagonist, Nora, I think, is it Nora? Yeah, Nora. She was just unremarkable, like she was just not interesting. And don't get me wrong, I understand that part of a message, or at least what I understood from it, is that part of the message of his book is that you don't have to be remarkable, you don't have to have like a exciting protagonist in order to pass on the message that life has value in itself. So I understand that probably a story like this, you might even want to have a remarkable character, because that's the whole point. Like, all lives are valuable, and it doesn't matter if you're not particularly remarkable or if you are not like standing out of the crowd. I get why he chose to make Nora just very normal, but it was boring. I'll be really honest. Like, I can't deny the fact that she was extremely boring, and if I couldn't care about her for the first 50 pages, I could care even less following her being boring in 20 other lives. You know what I mean? One was more than enough. Like, I didn't dislike it necessarily, because at the beginning was quite excited about the premise, and there are like the ice life, I'm just gonna say it like that. I found it quite entertaining, but then the way she describes events in all of these other lives as being like, oh, well, it wasn't that good. Like, I was always expecting for something exciting to happen and never did. I understand, that's the message. Life doesn't have to be too exciting to have value. I get it. Like, I don't have a particularly exciting life and I still value my life a lot. But in a book format, when I like to have a lot of adventure and explosive things happening in my books, or have amazing writing that really captures me, we said none of it. So yeah, ultimately 3 stars, wasn't horrible, but definitely wasn't good. And the last entrance for the string of disappointment I had this month was, and again, sorry, I'm gonna probably make you mad in a second, Daisy Jones and the Six. Listen, I like her writing, and I really enjoyed The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This one, where you follow this kind of, you know, the rise and fall of this band, and particularly of, you know, Daisy, who joins the band later in the day, becomes the main singer, and then, you know, all things come crumbling down. This one didn't work nearly as good for me as The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo did. There are a couple of things I want to say though that I did really like. I really like the structure of this book, where you basically follow these bandmates being interviewed like years down the line by an author, and so you got literally, like, I'm gonna show you a page just to make you understand without giving any spoilers. You see, you got like the name, answering question, and telling the story in this way. And this kind of format is something that I really appreciate. Like, the way she structured this story was very peculiar and unique, and made this story flow by very quickly. Probably would have not read this as quickly or even finished it if it wasn't for this style she adopts while writing this. I have also to say that her twists are now, like, I've read just a couple of things by her, but now I'm getting the gist of the twists. Like, I didn't see it coming. It's not like a massive twist, but I didn't see it happening. But when it did happen, I recognized some similarities with what happened in the other book by her that I read. So I'm starting to understand that she has a MO, and I eventually hope though that she kind of can twist this a bit around, because I can imagine that if I read like other books by her and this is the kind of twist we get, I will start guessing it, if it makes sense. But this is just me rambling on. And I did like the character of Camilla, and I really liked the character of Graham as well. Graham wasn't, and Karen and Graham were alright overall. I like the story of Graham and Karen way more than the story of Billy and Daisy and Camilla. Listen, if I knew what this book was really about, I would have not picked it up, because I don't care about reading about that kind of stories. I found this kind of thing quite disrespectful, and I'm not saying it's not realistic, I'm not saying it doesn't happen in real life, I'm just saying that's not something I want to read about. And there is a distinction between the two facts. I recognize the reality of it, but it doesn't mean that I want to spend my time on them. And I don't want to spoil absolutely anything, but at the same time, I would say maybe dig a bit deeper into what this book is about before you make a choice, because that personally hindered my whole experience of the book. I was like, am I really reading about these and this kind of conflict inside? Like, no. The character of Billy was okay. Like, I understood Billy, avoided and particularly like him a bit more. Like, I respected also his intention a bit more. Daisy, I can't stand Daisy. Listen, that is another thing that probably plays a part. Like, I would never be friends with someone like Daisy, and it's only purely about her behavior. And this is a very personal thing. In my life, I would not be friends with someone like her. Like, I would not hang out with someone like her. She's definitely not my style of person, not my style of friend, and the life she conducts for me is like a life that's so far away from any kind of life I will ever wish or want or be around to. So I didn't like her, I didn't like what she was up to, and ultimately in the end I was just like, really? I also, like, in the end, the very end, to be fair, that's an end I've seen before. So she didn't get me with that kind of ending. And I also thought that what happens in the end to the character, you know, to one of my favorite characters, like one of the few characters I wanted, the very end, was kind of unfair. So much was done to this character, put up with so much, and that's the end this character gets. Like, I know, life is not fair. Listen, I know. Maybe I was not in the right mood to get a book that was kind of realistic, but definitely, like, putting me, like, in a bad mood. Like, I was in a bad mood for most of this book. I was like, I am pissed that I have to read about this. And I shouldn't have forced myself, in a sense, but I mean, it was so easy to read that I didn't mind reading it. But ultimately, yeah, not my favorite thing. Won't reread it, or probably, I don't know if I'm gonna watch the TV show. Depends, because I want to listen to the songs. I really loved the songs, so I don't know what I'm gonna do with the TV show. I'll figure it out. Okay, I had to open my window because there is this ongoing fight. Basically, London weather versus the second floor of my house. So London didn't get the memo that summer started, so we are getting, like, objectively sometimes even coldish weather, rain and wind all day, all July. Didn't see the sun in July, basically never. And the other contestant is the second floor of my house, which is an oven, despite the fact that outside sucks. So there is this duel ongoing and I'm stuck in the middle, yeah? So the window is open, probably be more noisy in the background now because of it. I apologize. We are done with the disappointment and we're gonna get into the reads that I enjoyed more overall. So at number, whether it's in here, I've got A Magic Steeped in Poison. And this is a Waterstone actually find, but I know the Fairloot are gonna do special editions of this one and the sequel, so this is a duology, and you follow this girl that her mother has died because she ingested some poison tea. In this world, people have tea powers, like they have powers that are interlinked with their ability of brewing tea. And don't remember exactly whoever consumes the tea gets some of these skills or only them brewing the tea have these powers, but you follow this girl who's now traveling to the palace, the royal palace, to take part in a royal competition to become the tea maker for the emperor, and whoever wins this competition also gets a lot of money, and she can use those money to research for a cure to save her sister who ingested the same poison that killed her mother. So it was a very unique premise, because as someone who doesn't drink tea, I was quite concerned that I would find this rather not interesting. However, this was extremely visually pleasing to read. Like her writing the description of the tea and the herbs and the flowers and plants we come with it, like the food that's also described in these. I could visualize it in my mind. So that's why I'm saying this was visually pleasing. I don't know if that's a thing. I'm gonna make it up now, but this was visually pleasing. I could picture stuff in my mind. I could get hungry and really immerse myself in this world. I was concerned that this would be quite boring, and it was just in slightly parts, but when the action picks up, and it picks up quite often, I was very entertained and invested in the story. I also enjoyed the main protagonist as well as the side characters, and I like the ending to a point that I might reach out for the sequel, although the reviews for the sequels are not that great. Overall though, it was solid. Overall, I was way more invested in the story than what I hoped by opening this book the first time, and also I had some peculiarities and some uniqueness to it. Okay, speaking of not the best of the year, but definitely not a disappointment as I dreaded, I have The Devouring Great. This is a YA fantasy, very supernatural, and you follow this girl moving back to their hometown, her mother hometown, and she is part of these founding families for this town. And when she gets to the town, she finds out that her and the other sons and daughters of the founders of the town have this task of protecting this town and the people in it from the Grey, which is kind of this alternative dimension, very bleak and deadly dimension that the town can go into. It's kind of like a portal, so stuff you can, or things that happen for which someone can be then moves to the Grey, and then usually they die when they go there. And there is a lot of lore and mystery around what is the Grey, who is the creature hunting the Grey, and that is what made this book particularly effective for me. I really liked that side of what's going on here, and it was also like kind of surprising and new, this kind of Grey, the creature in it, like it wasn't like something I've read before personally, so that's what kept me entertained. It was action-packed. I didn't mind any of the characters actually. I enjoyed all of them and their dynamics. Yes, it is YA, yes, it is predictable on the other side as critiques, like it wasn't like mind-blowing, the plot twist that would happen, but again, because it's got a good mystery and solid characters and a bit of horror-ish elements in it, I was entertained, and I will continue on with the sequel. It is just a duology and I've acquired the sequel, so now it's in my hands and sooner or later I get around to it. Okay, the next one, it was a very solid read for me, like I really appreciated this book, and this is Mother for Dinner. This is a literature fiction where you follow a family, but it's a very peculiar family because they are the last survivor of this culture called the cannibals Americans, and they have a problem now because the new generations are not that ready to uphold the religious or cultural rules that they should abide to. So the way the cannibals American work is that they don't usually eat people unless someone in the family dies. So if someone in a cousin, mother, son dies, the tradition says that you need to consume, the family members left have to consume the pieces of that person, so have to eat that person in order for that person to continue existing. So what happens is that mother, one of the very few last cannibal American left that still, you know, keep the tradition going, is now passing away, and she wants her 12 or 13 kids to consume her upon her death. And you can only imagine like the chaos that ensues when this happens, because all their kids, the majority of them hate her. Some are vegetarian, some are veterinarians that, you know, they don't wanna keep the tradition going. And so you got this big question throughout this book, or are they refusing it? This was wild in a sense, but also I really appreciate how I look at this book very much as a symbol to like a whole discussion underneath it. So I really, first of all, appreciate the message of the author, which is, at the end of the day, we are all assholes. And he packs a punch regarding, you know, how, you know, we have so many labels these days, and, you know, all the kind of religious culture, sexuality, gender you can imagine, and now that is creating, you know, division between us. And now underneath it all, truly we are all, you know, skin and bones. And so the message behind this that I took away from it is, we are all humans, we all belong, because underneath it all, again, we are all humans. But in our struggle to try and belong, in our struggle to try and identify as something, and, you know, to create a small community, we're actually growing more distant to each other. And it's just a bit of like a catch-22 situation that I saw, and the way he portrayed society and the way he is condemning a lot of things from society nowadays, that is something that really worked for me. This is a book that eventually I will want to reread though, because I think there is like more to unpack to it, but definitely a unique read. And yes, overall I would suggest this if you are up for a very weird comedy slash, you know, social commentary about today's society. And I think he did in a very funny way. Said that, this book might not be for everyone, because there are a lot of strong opinions in this book and some people might not like them. So just be aware of that. Maybe you want to dig a bit more into, you know, some of the topics of these. Very glad I read this. This has been a very solid read for this month, and it's a book that will stick with me in the future. Then I've got Salem's Lot. I finally read this book that I was really eager to read because of all Stephen King's backlist are somehow retelling of Dracula, my favorite classic, had to make, you know, top of the list. So I was really looking forward to reading these, and overall I enjoyed it. Dracula is my favorite classic. Any retelling of it, it's a very dangerous territory to go in, okay? Any retelling of our favorite things, I think they have like a very high standard, or we keep them to very high standards. And no, this wasn't nearly as good as Dracula, didn't even come closer. However, if there was an author that I'm very happy I gave a chance of doing a retelling, or sort of retelling, it's not exactly the same, but it's a basic principle beneath it, it's Stephen King. And Stephen King, despite, you know, the plot being okay, nothing particularly special, is his way of telling the story. It's the way he looks at small town communities and can really make you immerse in that community. It can characterize like a lot of the people of the town and really make you feel like you had enough at the end. And I do get why his books are so long. They need to be so long to create the atmosphere, to have that kind of creating characters, and, you know, characters that eventually you will follow toward the end, and, you know, maybe you get a sentence here and there, or what happened to one or the other, but because it's built up that kind of community sense, you still feel for each one of them, despite them not being the protagonist or them not occupying too many pages in his stories. That's why I love King and his writing. I didn't give a synopsis because this is very similar to Dracula in modern times. A bad guy moves into town and people start turning into vampires, and you follow the good guys trying to, you know, save the day. Definitely not my favorite King. I've read way better books by him than these. Wasn't that remarkable apart from his storytelling, and despite it being like 700 more pages long, and despite again the plot being just alright, he never lost me because of the way he tells the story, and that in itself is something that I have to appreciate. So the next book I have read in 2 days because I wanted to have one more book read this month, and this was a very quick read, to be fair, although it wasn't that light. And At third place, we are all completely beside ourselves. Now, meet the second book in the year that made me cry, okay? This is the only other book that really had me in tears this year. Probably it's the book that had me with the most tears in the year. I don't cry that often, so just to say, this is a literature fiction, contemporary story in a sense. Could also be considered like a contemporary. I always struggle when it comes down to contemporary and literature fiction. I know a bit of a difference, but not really, not an expert. So if you wanna help me out, please let me know more about the distinction between literature fiction and contemporary fiction, because I am overall still confused. And this is the story of this girl. Now, you follow her in 1996, I believe, when she starts college. But from the beginning, she tells you that when she was 5 years old, she used to live with her parents, a sister, and a brother. And then something tragic happens. She goes for a few weeks to her grandparents' house on her own, and when she comes back, her sister is gone. First part of this story is finding out what happened to the sister and her taking her time to tell you. Now, the reveal happens at page 77, between 77 and 80. Someone said, oh, the reveal is halfway through. No, it's not. Like, first 100 pages, you'll know what the big thing is, and you know from the back that there is a big thing happening. Now, this is basically impossible for me to go into much details about these without spoiling anything, so I'm gonna be very, very vague. It made me cry, and the surprise is something that I don't think no one can see coming. If you've read this, or if you read these and you call it before it happens, please let me know, because I am generally like, I applaud you. Like, I think I'm usually quite good at guessing twists most of the times, not always. This one I could not even like start to guess, and this made it into a book about a topic that I've never read before, not like this. So this book was unique. And I can just say, without spoiling anything, how much I appreciated the writing, how sarcastic it was in the right spots. Like, it was a very pleasant, like almost funny at times read, while dealing with something extremely tragic and something that we don't speak about much. And I think we are so loud about a lot of other very important and current topics, but this that has been happening for decades and it's still happening now. Nowadays we are so loud and we just really use social media and things to fight for certain rights, but there are so many more things where we don't fight for or we don't speak that much about. Is it fair that we don't put up the same fight? I don't think it is, personally. So I can't say more without spoiling anything. So this is very difficult. I just think that this is something that we should fight more for, and we don't. I understand, you know, on a psychologist side that there might be a reason for it or whether is the case. So it's just a topic that actually open up like a can of worms and, you know, open up like so many thoughts and feelings in my head. But it was unique. It was very well written, and yes, I would suggest this book if you like literature fiction, if you like to be surprised, and if you like to read something that you probably have not read or not in a while at least. Like, I mean, if you've read something similar, let me know. This is not fantasy, it's not thriller, there is not the element of it, so it's purely a literature fiction. And if you read this, I would love to know what you thought about this, because it's like a book I want to speak about so much with people, and no one else I know has read this. Then I came across these 1 hour, I think it's 1 hour essay on Scribd. It's about writing about trauma, but the title is Writing in the Wounds, something of the sort, by Roxane Gay. And I never read anything else by the author, and I knew though that she is quite popular when it comes down to non-fiction, and I wanted to try her writing, and I found these, listened to this in 1 hour, couldn't stop listening, and I fell in love with her and with her writing. She read these and it really came across as, you know, her passion for the topic, and also really appreciated like all she says in this essay. So this is basically an essay around how she wrote in hunger. I think that's a biography by her, how she wrote about the trauma she survived. And how then, you know, it was very hard to promote this book because of the way she was treated by the publishing and the journalists, and I was absolutely horrified by the experience that she had to go through. And to these days, as someone who wants to specialize in trauma therapy, as myself, I've experienced trauma, I have worked with trauma, and that is the kind of area where I want to specialize. This was gold. And someone like Roxane Gay, with her way of communicating, with her way of also sending powerful messages, for example, saying you don't need to be explicit about the traumatic experience you had. And when people ask for details, they are not understanding your trauma. They just want to feed that kind of morbid curiosity. To a certain degree, we all have, but trauma is so much more than satisfying, someone's curiosity. And you don't have to be explicit in recounting your trauma in order to really write about it. And I love that message because I couldn't agree more. You can write about trauma without having to be explicit about what happened to you. That is not something someone has the right to request, for you to go in any specific details. And to be fair, on a psychological point of view, we've done studies now where when you are experiencing a trauma, part of your brain kind of doesn't work properly. This is a very complex thing to explain in a very brief moment, and I don't have a fully grasp of it, but I have read studies where basically when you're experiencing this trauma, as I was saying, part of your brain goes temporarily off. So you are unable to verbally express the emotions that happened during the trauma because that part of the brain has switched off in the moment that trauma happened. So your brain is kind of like shutting off part of it. So your ability to recount or vocalize emotions is impaired. Asking someone to go into so much details about their trauma and what they experienced during the trauma is not that easy to do, and it's not always doable, just biologically speaking. So I think, there is a lot of trauma studies that they're doing and they are so fascinating. So yeah, just to say, sorry about the ramble, that I really love this and I can't wait to read more by the author. And people like these are my heroes, like people that can be so vulnerable, so honest and so well spoken. And number one, to be fair, like Writing in the Wound and these, I enjoyed them equally, just for different reasons, but because that one was just an hour essay and these book that I'm about to show you really sticked with me throughout the month. That's why this is in first place. And this is The Science of a Girl by Pat Barker. This is the shortlisted Women Prize Fiction for 2019, and it is a retelling of the Troy invasion and war, but from the perspective of Briseis. And initially I was a bit misguided about this book because I believed we would take a focus about Briseis, her story, and focus mostly on her, and maybe she would have twisted the story differently, or different things would have happened, or we would have followed Briseis more before or after Achilles. We don't. This is literally Troy invasion story, so the Achilles story and Patroclus story, as Briseis as a witness in all of this. Initially this is what went wrong with the story, because I was reading it and I was waiting for this kind of focus to shift from Achilles and Patroclus to Briseis. But then I adjusted and I really put any preconception aside and decided to just follow the story along. And by the end, I loved what the author does, because what she does is that she tells you about my favorite legend of Greek mythology, like Troy, Achilles, Patroclus, all of that, but she does it in a very different way. When they say, every story has two sides to it, this is a perfect example of it. I grew up reading about Achilles and Patroclus, and how Achilles was his hero, how he was strong, his tragic death, and so on. This one takes the other side of, well, Achilles has killed a lot of people. Well, Achilles has done a lot of atrocious things. Achilles is a hero for some, but for someone he's a butcher. His character in this, it was truly gruesome at times reading these, and it was heartbreaking for someone who loved Achilles and Troy's story for so long. The way she portrays these men in a way that, to be fair, feels very realistic for how much you can in a legend. Very truth to, the environment of war and being away from your country for decades. There is some elements of gods in here, like there is some fantasy elements, but they are very, they don't take the priority, is very much feels very real. What we are witnessing, what we're living through. And the way she showed me one of my favorite stories in a completely different light and made me really open my eyes and really made me see both sides of the same story. I can't just stop praising her for it. I will definitely check out more by the author. I think these will have a special place in my heart because she achieved something. The way that she can do it, the way she decided, okay, let me tell you a story that we all know, we all grew fond of, or like so many of us grew fond of, but let me tell you what this story could really have been, if you know, just from a different perspective. That is remarkable. Like, if an author can do that, you got me. And although I didn't love Briseis as a character, and no one truly is lovable in this story is truly bigger than the sum of its parts, and the point is not liking anybody in this story. Overall, it was an okay reading month, but because of these 3 reads and The Silence of the Girls and Roxane Gay essays, it was actually a very good month, and I found some highlights of the year. Thank you for watching. If you're new, we'd love for you to subscribe. Let me know what was your favorite read of the month and your least enjoyable read of the month. Let's chat in the comments down below. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time. Ciao!